Chapter 5 of Pawns in the Game by William Guy Carr. American Revolution. In order to understand how men who obtained control of the Bank of England and the British national debt also obtained control of the trade and commerce and the monetary system of Britain's American colonies, it will be sufficient if we pick up the thread of the story at the time of Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790 went over to England to represent the interests of the men who had been associated with him in building this prosperity of the American colonies. Robert L. Owen, former chairman committee on banking and currency, United States Senate, explains the matter on page 98 of Senate number document number 23. He states that when associates of the Rothschilds asked Franklin how he had acquainted for the prospects conditions were prevailing in the colonies, he replied, "That isn't simple. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry." Robert L. Owen remarks that not long after the Rothschilds hear of this, they realize the opportunity to exploit the situation with considerable profit to themselves. The obvious thing to do was to have a law passed prohibiting the colonial officials from issuing their own money and make it the banks. Amschel Mayer Rothschild was still in Germany, but he was supplying the British government with mercenary troops at £8 per man. Such was his influence that in 1764 he succeeded through the directors of the Bank of England in having laws passed in accordance to his dictates. The authorities in the colonies had to discard the scrip money. They had to mortgage the colonial assets into securities to the Bank of England in order to borrow the money they needed they needed to carry on the business. Referring to those facts, Benjamin Franklin stated, "In 1 year, the conditions were so reversed that the era of prosperity ended, and a depression set in, to such an extent that the banks of the colonies were filled with unemployed." Franklin stated the Bank of England refused to give more than 50 cents per the since 50% of the face value of the scripts when turned over as required by law. The circulating medium of exchange was thus reduced by half. Mr. Franklin disclosed the primary cause of the revolution when he said, "The colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created the unemployment and dissatisfaction." Dissatisfaction became general, but very few colonists realized that the taxation and other economic sanctions being imposed on them was the result of the activities of a small group of international gangsters, which had succeeded in obtaining control of the British Treasury. After they had obtained control of the Bank of England, it has already been shown the how the how Britain's national debt jumped from 1.25 million pounds to in 1694 to 16 million pounds in 1689, and increased it progressively to 885 million pounds by 1815 and 22,532,372 by 1945. On April 19, 1775, the first armed clashes between British and colonials took place in Lexington and Concord. On May 10th, the Second Continental Congress met at Philadelphia, and George Washington was placed at the head of the naval and military force. He took command at Cambridge. On July 4th, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. For the next 7 years, the international moneylenders argued and financed the colonial war. The Rothschilds made plenty of money supplying the British with German Haitian soldiers with which to fight the colonists. The average Brit had no quarrel with his American cousin. He secretly empathized with them. On October 19th, 1781, the British commander General Cornwallis surrendered his whole army, including what was left of the Haitians. On September 3rd, 1783, the independence of the United States was recognized by the Peace Treaty of Paris. The only real losers were the British people. Their national debt had been increased tremendously, and the international moneylenders, who were in reality the secret power behind the world revolutionary movements, had succeeded in the first stage for the long range plans towards the dissolution of the British Empire. The agents of the international bankers worked industriously to prevent unity. By keeping the various states in America separated, it was much easier to exploit them. To prove the continuity of the foreign moneylenders meddling in the affairs of every nation, it is sufficient to record that the founding fathers of the United States, meeting in Philadelphia in 1787, talked over the importance of bringing in some sort of legislation which would protect them against the exploitation of the international bankers. The agents of the international bankers organized active lobbying. They used intimidation. But despite all their efforts, paragraph 5 of section 8, the first article on the new American Constitution, read, Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. The vast majority of the United States citizens consider the Constitution an honored and almost sacred document. All laws passed since were then are supposed to conform with the provisions of the Constitution. The fact that subsequent legislation dealing with finance and currency have been in violation of the provisions laid down in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5 proves how powerful the bankers have been in the political field. The history of how the international moneylenders obtained economic control of the United States in order to further their long range plan is missing text. The history of how the international moneylenders obtained economic control of the United States in order to further their long range plan is decidedly interesting. Using the good old reliable joint stock company principle, the directors of the Bank of England appointed one of their hiring names, Alexander Hamilton, to represent their interests in the United States. In 1780, this man, a supposed patriot, proposed the establishment of a federal bank. It was to be owned by private interests as an alternative to those who insisted the issue and control of the money should remain in the hands of the government elected by the people. Alexander Hamilton suggested that his proposed federal bank be capitalized for $12 million. The Bank of England would provide $10 million. The remaining $2 million would be allocated to wealthy people in America. In 1783, Alexander Hamilton and his business partner Robert Morris organized the Bank of America. As financial superintendent of the Continental Congress, Morris was able to reduce the United States Treasury to a state of 134 indigenous by the end of his 7 years of war. This is another illustration of how the secret power used wars to further their plan for the WRM. To make absolutely sure the United States financial cupboard was bare, Hamilton transformed the last $250,000 from the Treasury Department and invested in the bank's capital stock. The directors of the Bank of America were agents of the Bank of England. The Illuminati controlled both. The fact that they sold their souls to Satan in order to gain the world is the truth they wish to conceal. The fathers of the American independence realized that if the directors of the Bank of England obtained monopolistic control of America's money system, they would recover any money they had lost by the simple process of mortgage and foreclosure. The net result of the struggle for economic control of the nation was that Congress refused to grant the Bank of America a charter. Benjamin Franklin died in 1790, and the agents of the international Jewish moneylenders immediately made another bid to obtain control of America's finances. They succeeded in having American Alexander Hamilton appointed Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton had the government charter the bank his principals had been clamoring for. It was then a simple matter to usurp the rights to issue the currency based on public and private debts. The most forceful arguments the bankers' agents had used to defeat their opposition was that money issued by Congress on the credit of the nation would be valueless in dealing abroad, while money obtained on a loan from the bankers at interest would be welcomed as legal security in all kinds of transactions. Thus, the public fell prey to the exploitation of 135 the men the men who professed to be their friends. Alexander Hamilton and Morris were never more than hirelings of the international moneylenders. The new bank was capitalized for $35 million. Of this amount, $28 million was subscribed by European bankers, which the Rothschilds controlled. It is suspected that the international bankers decided that Hamilton knew too much and couldn't be trusted any longer. He was inveigled into a duel with an expert named Aaron Burr, who acted as his executioner. While American citizens were used as frontmen by the international bankers, policy was determined in Europe. The Rothschild interests gave orders that the American bankers were to extend almost unlimited credit for good security and put plenty of money into circulation. The propaganda media played upon the highest notes of optimism. Prosperity was assured. The Americans were destined to become the greatest people on earth. Everybody was urged to invest the future of his great nation. Whenever one of any worth had mortgaged himself to the hilt, orders were given to tighten up credits, recall outstanding loans, and reduce the amount of money in circulation. An artificial depression was created. Citizens could not meet their financial obligations, and the barons obtained millions of dollars worth of property and securities at a fraction of their normal value. Admittedly, everything was done by due process of the law, but Al Capone and his gangsters were gentlemen in comparison with the international bankers. Many great Americans have commented on this phase of the history of the United States, but their expressed opinions don't seem to have prevented their successors from falling into the same traps and pitfalls. John Adams, 1735 to 1826, wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1787. He said, "All the perplexities, confusion, and distress arise not from the defects of the Constitution, not from wants of honor and virtue, so much as from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation." Thomas Jefferson said, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a money aristocracy that has set governments at defiance. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs." Andrew Jackson said, "If Congress has a right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given to them. It was given it was given them to use by themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations." These outspoken comments warned the international bankers to accept serious opposition when their charter for the Bank of the United States ran out in 1811. To prepare for this eventuality, Michel Mayer Rothschild had obtained absolute control of the Bank of England in order to strengthen his control of the world's economy. His son, Nathan, had been specially trained to undertake this tremendous task, as previously mentioned. Nathan proved to have exceptional talents and ability for financial affairs. He trained himself only to think in terms of profits, just as the professional politicians think only in terms of votes. In 1798, at the early age of 21, he went over from Germany to secure the control of the Bank of England. He was entrusted with the modest sum of £20,000. To demonstrate his financial wizardry, he speculated and in a comparatively short time, 3 years, increased his capital to £60,000. By 1811, when the matters of the renewal of the charter for the Bank of America was due for a hearing, Nathan Rothschild was in control of the international bankers. He issued his ultimatum: either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. President Andrew Jackson didn't believe the international bankers would form a war. He decided to call their bluff. He told them bluntly, "You are a den of thieves, vipers. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out." But President Jackson had underestimated the power of the Rothschilds. Nathan Rothschild issued orders: teach these impudent Americans a lesson, bring them back to colonial status. The British government, always in subservience to the Bank of England, subservient to the Bank of England, launched the War of 1812. This war was calculated to impoverish the United States to such an extent the legislators would have to plead for peace and seek financial aid. Nathan Rothschild stipulated that no financial aid would be forthcoming except in return for the renewal of the charter or the Bank of America. Nathan Rothschild's plan worked to perfection. It mattered not to him how many men were killed and wounded, how many women were widowed, how many children were made orphans, how many people were rendered destitute. He and his co-conspirators rejoiced in the fact that they had archived to their objective, and in so doing, they had created more and more dissatisfaction amongst the masses of the people who blamed the blundering policies of their own governments, while the secret power behind the scene remained unsuspected by all except a very few people. In 1816, the United States Congress granted the renewal of the charter for the Bank of the United States as requested. There are many authorities who state that quite frankly that the members of Congress were bribed or threatened into voting for the legislation which puts the American people back into financial bondage. The men who plan to secure economic and political control of the world don't hesitate to prostitute love to archive their ends any more than they hesitate to order committed murder committed to rid them of men who stand in their way. In 1857, the marriage of Leonora, daughter of Lionel Rothschild, to her cousin Alfonso they, of Paris, they believe in keeping things within the family, brought many international personages to London, England, where the ceremony was performed. Benjamin Disraeli, the noted English statesman who was made prime minister in 1868 and again in 1874, was invited to be present. Disraeli is reported to have said during his speech on the memorable occasion: "Under this roof are the heads of the family of Rothschild, a name famous in every capital of Europe and every division of the globe. If you like, we shall divide the United States into two parts, one for you, James, and one for you, Lionel. Napoleon will do exactly and all that I advised him to do, and Bismarck will be suggested such an intoxicating program as to make him our abject slave." History records that Judah P. Benjamin, a Rothschild relative, was appointed as the professional strategist in America. The American Civil War, which split the Union in two, became an accomplished fact. Napoleon III was persuaded by the bankers to extend his French Empire into Mexico. The British government was persuaded that the northern states could be made into a colony again. The Civil War in the United States was an economic war brought about by the international bankers by applying economic pressure. It was a simple matter to aggravate the economic difficulties the northern states encountered after the slaves had been given their freedom. Abraham Lincoln admitted no nation can long endure half free and half slaves. The international bankers loaned unlimited credit to all forces engaged by the South fighting the forces of the North. They loaned Napoleon III 201,500,000 francs for his Mexican campaign. When the Confederacy needed assistance in 1863, the powers that be offered Napoleon Texas and Louisiana in exchange for French intervention against the northern states. The Tsar of Russia heard of these preposterous offers and he informed the governments of England and France that should they actively intervene and give military aid to the south, Russia would consider such action as a declaration of war against the Imperial Russian Empire. To strengthen his ultimatum, Russian warships were sent to New York and San Francisco and placed at Lincoln's disposal. When the northern authorities found themselves in financial difficulties, the international bankers didn't refuse to loan the money. They simply stipulated that the rate of interest to the northern states would be 28%. After all, they were in business as moneylenders. An important aspect of this American Civil War is that it would in all probability have reached a conclusion in a few months had not the intervention money lenders made fresh loans. These loans were usury. They were based on terms and rates of interest which were calculated to give international bankers control of the economy of the whole country. When they considered its time, they ended the war. Lincoln tried to break the financial bonds with the northern his northern states were bonds. To him, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5 of the Constitution was sufficient authority. He disregarded the bankers' overtures. He caused $450 million of honest money to be printed. He placed the credit of the nation as security behind this money. The international bankers re- retaliated by causing a bill to be passed through Congress ruling the Lincoln's greenbacks would not be accepted as payments of interest on government bonds nor import duties. The bankers caused Lincoln's money to become almost valueless to by refusing to accept the greenbacks except at a heavy discount. Having beaten down the value of greenback dollars to 30 cents, they bought them all in. They then turned around and bought government bonds with them, demanding dollar for dollar value. In this way, they overcame a serious threat and made 70 cents on the dollar. An article inspired by the international bankers appeared in the London Times. It concerned Abraham Lincoln's issue of greenbacks. It said, of this mischievous financial policy, which has its origin in North America, shall become endurance down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debts. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will be prosperous without precedence in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. The hazard circular was supplied to all the banking instruments from overseas. It read, slavery is likely to be abolished by war power. This I and my European friends are in favor of, because slavery is but the owning of labor, and carries with it the care of the laborers, while the European plan, led on by England, is that capital shall control labor by control clean wages. The great debts the capitalists will see is made out of the war must be used to control the value of money. To accomplish this, government bonds must be used as a banking bias. We are now waiting for the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States to make that recommendation. It will not do to allow greenbacks, as they are called, to circulate as money for any length of time, as we cannot control that. But we can control the bonds and through them the banking issues. The bankers finance the election campaigns of enough senators and congressmen to assure them that the National Banking Act would become law. The National Banking Act did become law in 1863 despite the vigorous protests of President Lincoln. Thus, the international bankers won another round. The people of the world had been brought one step nearer to economic, political, and religious bondage. On the letterhead of Rothschild's brother bankers, London, England, under date of June 25th, 1863, the following was written to Messrs. Ilkenheimer, Morton, and Van der Gort, number 3, Wall Street, New York, USA. Dear Sirs, Mr. John Sherman has written us from a town in Ohio, USA, as to profits that may be made in the national banking business under a recent act of your Congress. A copy of this act accompanies this letter. Apparently, this act has been drawn on upon the plan formulated by the British Bankers Association and by the association recommended to our American friends as one that is enacted into law would prove highly profitable to the banking fraternity throughout the world. Mr. Sherman declares that there has never been such an opportunity for capitalists to accumulate money as that presented by this act. It gives the national bank almost complete control of the national finance. The few who understand the system will say he says, will either be so interested in its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. While on the other hand, the great body of people mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages that capital derives from the system will bear its burden without complaints, and perhaps without even suspecting that the entire system is inimical to their interests. Were yours respectively, servants, Rothschild, brothers. In reply to the letter, Messrs. Ilkheimer, Morton, and Van der Gold replied, Dear Sirs, we beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter of June 25th, in which you refer to communication received from Honorable John Sherman of Ohio, with reference to the advantages and profits of the American investment under the provisions of National Banking Act. Mr. Sherman possesses in a marked degree the distinguishing characteristics of successful financiers. His temperament is such that whatever his feelings may be, they never cause him to lose sight on the main chance. He is young, shrewd, and ambitious. He has fixed his eyes upon the presidency of the United States and already is a member of Congress. He has financial ambitions too. He rightfully thinks he has everything to gain by being friendly with men and institutions having large financial resources, and which at times are not too particular in their methods either of obtaining government aid or protecting themselves against unfriendly legislation. As to the organization of the national bank here, the nature and profits of such investments, we beg leave to refer to our printed circular enclosed herein, viz. Any number of persons not less than 5 may organize a national banking corporation, except in cities having 6,000 inhabitants or less. A national bank cannot have less than $1 million capital. They are private corporations organized for private gain and select their own officers and employees. They are not subject to control of state laws except as commerce may from time to time provide. They may receive deposits and loan the same for their own benefits. They can buy and sell bonds and discount paper and do general banking business. To start a national bank on the scale of $1 million will require purchase of that amount's per value of the United States government bonds. U.S. bonds can now be purchased at 50% discounts, so that a bank of $1 million capital can be started at this time for only $500,000. These bonds must be deposited in the United States as security for the national bank currency that will be furnished by the government to the bank. The United States will pay 6% interest on all bonds in gold and interest being paid semi-annually. It will be seen that at the present price of bonds and the interest paid by the government itself is 12% in gold on all money invested. The United States government on having the bonds aforesaid aforesaid deposited with the treasurer on the strength of such security will furnish national currency to the bank depositing the bonds at an annual interest of only 1% per annum. The currency is printed by the United States government in a form so that greenbacks that the people do not detect the difference. Although the currency is but a promise of the bank to pay, the demand for money is so great that this money can be readily loaned to the people across the counter of the bank at a discount at the rate of 10% at 30 or 60 days' time, making it about 12% interest on the currency. The interest on the bonds plus in the interest on the currency which the bond secures plus the incidentals of the business ought to make the gross earnings of the bank amount to from 28% to 33 and one-third percent. National banks are privileged to increase and contract their currency at will and, of course, can grant or withhold loans as they may see fit. As the banks have a national organization and can easily act together in withholding loans or extending them, it follows that they can, by united action in refusing to make loans, cause the stringency in the money markets, and in a single week or even a single day, cause a decline in all products of the country. National banks pay no taxes on their bonds, nor on their capital, nor on their deposits, requiring that you will regard this as strictly confidential. Most respectfully yours, Ilkheimer, Morton, and Van der Gaalt. Following the exchange of the above letters, the American bankers put into practice once again the manipulations mentioned. They repeat another rich harvest by foreclosures on property and securities left with them as security for loans, which their clients could not repay because the bankers, acting in unity, before Lincoln was murdered, Salmon P. Chase, who was Secretary of the United States Treasury 1861 to 1864, stated publicly, "My agency in promoting the passage of the National Banking Act was the greatest financial mistake of my life. It has built up a monopoly which affects every interest in the country. It should be repealed, but before that can be accomplished, the people may be arrayed on one side and the banks on the other, in a contest such as we have never seen before in this country." In 1866, there was $1,906,787,770 in currency in circulation in the United States. This represented $50.46 per capita. At the end of 1876, there was only about $605,250,000 in circulation, representing a per capita amount of 1460. The currency of the nation had been reduced by banks' withdrawals to the extent of over 1.3 billion. The importance of these figures will be better understood by the average man when he learns that the net result of the banker's policy was a total of 56,446 business failures, representing a loss of 2,245,105,000 in cash investments. The larger proportion of the losses was incurred by mortgage foreclosures. In other words, by withdrawing currency and restricting credits, the bankers had enriched themselves by well over $2 billion in a little over 10 years. There is plenty of evidence to prove that the American bankers and European bankers have been affiliated ever since, and that subsequent depressions were created by similar financial manipulations, as will be explained in other chapters.